Hello, Telvani here, and I thought I would bring you another build update / guide on my Lightning Strike Raider. In this video, I'm going to go in depth about the decisions I made while building this character. I'll go over the build's strengths and weaknesses, and we'll also take a look at some possible upgrades you could make, as well as some budget and alternative gear options available. But before we do, if you're liking my content and want to see more videos from me, please like this video and subscribe to the channel, as I do spend a lot of time making these for you guys, and every single click helps out massively. Alright, let's get into it. Lightning Strike Raider is an incredibly fast and fun build to play. It comes online very early, as the Raider Ascendancy grants us a ton of things, like spell suppression and ailment avoidance. These things are absolutely huge, as they make gearing significantly easier to do. As both spell suppression and ailment avoidance are basically an all or nothing stat, since getting hit for 100% damage by a spell, or getting frozen, even 10% of the time feels absolutely terrible. Basically every other Ascendancy in the game will need to find clever ways to reach 100% in both of these stats, such as buying expensive boots, spending 5 to 10 extra skill points on the tree, or rolling 2,000 harvest enchants on your jewels. Raider also gains access to an insane amount of damage, movement speed, and evasion rating through the use of its frenzy scaling passives. This makes it a dream to map with, as this build will be absolutely zooming. And honestly, the evasion rating is nothing to laugh at. A frenzy charge stacking Raider without a Jade Flask will probably still have more evasion rating than another Ascendancy with one. This could potentially free up a Flask slot if you wanted it to. Next, Raider has built-in exposure, which makes this class feel super smooth to play, as you don't need to be doing clunky things like dropping Hydrosphere to boost your damage. Finally, Raider has built-in phasing. This is honestly an amazing ability, especially in this league, as it makes things like boss rushing or sentinel farming strats super easy to do, as you don't need to worry about getting stuck inside packs of monsters and dying. In the interest of fairness, I should mention that there are a few other good ascendancies for Lightning Strike this league. Champion, for example, is a very defensive class. But honestly, with some of the new technologies available to us this league, which we'll go over in a minute here, that gap is much smaller than it used to be. Berserker is also a good choice of ascendancy, boasting a much higher damage ceiling than Raider. However, Berserker's playstyle is a lot more high maintenance, requiring you to manage things such as your Berserk and Rage Bar, and also keeping an eye on manually casting Withering Step. Ultimately, I believe Raider is the best choice for the majority of players, as it is much easier to play, requiring less precise buff management, and it is much easier to gear for than any other Ascendancy out there. This keeps your gear costs relatively lower, even in the extreme endgame. Alright, so now that we know why we should most likely be playing Raider, let's take a look at the skill itself, Lightning Strike. Lightning Strike is one of the most powerful attack-based skills around. This is due to a number of things. First off, if we jump in game here, you can see that when I cast Lightning Strike, a beam of lightning strikes the ground, and subsequent projectiles travel outwards from my character. The very interesting thing here is that both of these can hit the same boss if you position yourself correctly. You'll have to play around with it in-game for yourself, but if we pretend this top right brazier is the boss, we want to be standing about this far away. This will allow our melee hit to target the boss, and the projectiles to hit them as well, effectively doubling your damage. The second reason Lightning Strike is so strong is that it has a Vol variant. This can be used to double our single target burst damage again, and it is also amazing for taking out packs of monsters. So between these two mechanics, we are looking at potentially 4 times more boss damage when compared with other skills. Lightning Strike also does not need to hit a target in order for the projectiles to fly out from you. This is absolutely huge. Anyone who has tried playing Wild Strike or Frost Blades knows exactly what I am talking about. The projectile portion of this skill causes it to be one of the best mappers around when it comes to strike skills. Now the one thing I do have to mention about Lightning Strike, however, is that it does collide with terrain, so that will limit the types of maps you will want to run. Open maps like Strand or Beach are great. Maps with elevation differences like Underground Sea or Flooded Mines, on the other hand, feel absolutely horrible. But if you can look past that flaw and are willing to run a limited map pool, Lightning Strike is going to be one of your smoothest mapping experiences ever. Alright, let's take a look at the gear we are using for this character. But before we do, I want to note that some of my gear is a little expensive, but I will try to mention alternative options for those of you on a budget. I am using Omniscience, as it is a massive damage increase, but I know for a fact this build functions in T16 maps without it, as I transitioned from Spectral Helix to Lightning Strike long before I had Omniscience. I'm also using a Headhunter because, well actually, why am I using a Headhunter? This thing is dead this league. All memes aside, it is still a pretty strong item, giving a massive amounts of stats and life, and GGG did say they are going to buff it, like yesterday, so I'm holding on to hope. Alright, with that little bit of a disclaimer out of the way, let's go right into it. For your Claw, you're going to want to Tri-Elemental Claw, with attack speed and crit chance. I don't actually have a Tri-Elemental Claw yet, and I am still using Penetration as my third prefix. Attack speed on the Claw is pretty huge, as it is a direct More multiplier. Since it increases the base attack speed of the weapon, it is then multiplied again by any modifiers you have elsewhere. For my shield, I am running maximum life and double tier 1 resistances with +3 maximum lightning resistance. I am only doing this because I have switched over to a Melding of the Flesh setup and have managed to get suppression and ailment avoidance on my chest. If you're not able to afford a Melding of the Flesh setup, I'd recommend just getting spell suppression and avoidance here, instead of resistances and calling it a day, since you won't have the massive resistances to offset the penalty from melding. A cool trick you can do with any shield that has an open prefix and full suffixes is to slam it with a Redeemer Orb. This will give you guaranteed increased elemental damage with attacks. Next up, we have our helmet. For this I am running maximum life, spell suppression, and mana reservation efficiency. You can pretty easily make a helmet for your character by grabbing an evasion or evasion armor base and spamming deafening essences of loathing until you get something you're happy with. If you're running Omniscience, you'll probably want an accuracy roll somewhere on your gear. I just happened to get tier 1 accuracy on the helmet while essence crafting, so I kept it. For your enchantment, you can do pretty much whatever you want, but if you don't have Anomalous of All Lightning Strike, you might want to consider picking up the Lightning Strike Pierces Additional Enemies enchant. For the Eldritch Implicits, the Searing Exarch reduced mana cost of attacks is one of the only useful ones for us, while the Eater of World mana reservation efficiency is really nice. For our chest, we either want an armor or armor evasion base with maximum life and chaos resistances. If you are doing a melding build, high spell suppression and ailment avoidance are pretty much mandatory here. And if you're doing an Omniscience build, Dex or Strength would be nice as well. You're going to want to get Searing Exarch Aura effect, and for the Eater of World implicit, I grabbed Purity of Lightning effect since I am running a Melding of the Flesh setup. However, if you're not running Melding, or can find another way to cap resistances at 90, something like Determination or Wrath effect would be very nice as well. For our gloves, you want life and spell suppression. Strike skills target additional nearby enemies is pretty mandatory. I have the tier 5 variant which gives +2 strikes, but if you can only afford +1, you can always run Tribal Fury on your Amulet Anoint to reach the golden standard of +2 strikes. There are a few good Eater of World implicits, like Accuracy and Mark Effect, but I went with Damage Leech, so I could drop 2 skill points on the tree. After that, I really like the Temple mod Cold Resistance and Damage against chilled enemies, since we are chilling absolutely everything. A good tip here is that you can use Harvest Resistance changes to change Temple mods, so you don't necessarily need to find one with cold on it naturally. Again, I had an open prefix, so I put Pierce on there, but flat elemental damage is also a good option. Moving on to our boots, we are running Dark Grey Vectors. These are some of the best boots we can get on our Raider, and are only 2 or 3% worse than 50x elevated Tailwind Onslaught boots. If you can get +2 AoE or Aura Gems, that can be a pretty big boost in DPS and defenses, as +2 gem level to auras is pretty huge. As for the enchant, we have a few good options. Flat added lightning if you haven't killed recently is actually better than damage penetration if you have Omniscience, and it is pretty close even if you don't. I actually own 2 pairs of Dark Rays at the moment, and my second pair is Stun Avoidance if you've killed recently. This is an absolute godsend for doing juiced Sentinel packs, as you will no longer get stun locked and potentially die. Moving on to our jewelry, as I've mentioned, I'm running Omniscience. I've anointed it with Sovereignty for aura effect and mana reservation. If you don't have +2 strike gloves, you'll want Tribal Fury instead. A good replacement for Omni for those who can't afford it is just an Agate Amulet with life, crit multi, and whatever other stat you may need. For the belt, I'm running Headhunter, but Mage Blood would be a stronger option at this time. Perseverance is also a good one if you can't afford either and are willing to run Grace. Otherwise, a Stygian Vise or Belt of the Deceiver will do pretty well for you. For the rings, I'm using them basically as stat sticks. Maximum life, attributes, and chaos resistance are ideal. If you can get elemental damage with attacks, that would be really strong as well. And another option here is to run Mark of the Elder and a Shaper ring for even more damage. But you will end up missing out on a lot of stats from running a unique ring, like chaos resistances. Moving on to our flasks, I'm running a pretty standard setup. Instant life with bleed immunity, a granite, jade, silver, and diamond flask. If you wanted to, you could drop the jade flask for a quicksilver flask if you needed more speed, but we have so much movement speed with elusive effect and frenzy charge scaling, I haven't really felt the need. If we take a look at the tree, I'm running a few cluster jewels. These are really strong, mostly because of the jewel sockets, honestly, as they let you get a lot more extra life than you could probably pick up on the tree. If I had a couple more skill points, I might grab a small armor cluster jewel for enduring composure. This would give us endurance charges, which would make an already mega tank build even tankier. You can see we got a lethal pride up here, however you could run one here, or even here instead of a cluster jewel. I'd recommend running lethal pride down here if you're going to be running inspired learning, as you'll probably want to run inspired learning up here or here, although you'll need to grab one of these accuracy nodes to do so. Next, I am running an imbalanced guard impossible escape. I made a video on these things which I recommend checking out if you haven't already, but this thing is really strong as it gives me accuracy and crit chance, 5% double damage, and +4 maximum lightning resistance, which opens up the door to being able to run Melding of the Flesh. Finally, I still haven't gotten my Watcher's Eye yet. I keep putting it off, but I'd probably want a precision attack damage and a determination physical damage reduction Watcher's Eye. This would give the build a lot more damage and additional defenses. If we take a look at the PoB, you can see we are already pretty tanky. 343,000 effective HP, so we're pretty much immortal while our Molten Shell is active. And if we were able to get that Endurance Cluster Jewel, this shoots up to 418,000. While we're in here, I'll go over the skills for you guys. First up, we've got our Vol Lightning Strike. The Anomalous variant is pretty important, as it gives Pierce to our projectiles. If you don't have this, you'll need to solve for Pierce either on the tree or with gear. I should also mention that the Vol variant is mandatory, as it gives us almost double damage during our burst. You can see down here that we deal about 15 mil DPS just with Lightning Strike. We are doing ×2 to approximate the melee hit plus the projectile hit. But that 15 mil goes up to 25 mil when Vol Lightning Strike is popping off. Drop this on bosses' faces and watch them absolutely melt. Honestly, I do think the damage in the current PoB is a little on the low side of what the build can do. But even now, it is more than capable of tackling endgame content like Uber Maven. We're only at about 15 million without Vol. However, things like a Watcher's Eye or a better Claw, like I mentioned earlier, could easily bring this build up to a very respectable 20 million DPS constant and 40 million burst. Another thing you can run to boost damage is Awakened Multi-Strike. I actually had one drop from Maven the other day, but I sold it off because I hate how clunky it makes the skill feel. But if you're looking for more damage, it is undeniably powerful. Here we have our movement skills. Flame Dash I don't really use that much since Withering Step shares charges with it, so you will usually only be at one charge. This is used mostly as an emergency button or to get over ledges, but you should be using Whirling Blades for the majority of your movement. Faster attacks on Whirling Blades is optional, and I would probably end up dropping it later since we'll be pretty pressed for socket space, as you'll see in a moment. We are running Withering Step on left click. This is used to reset our elusive effect and keep our damage output high. Because we are running elusive on left click, we are running Molten Shell on a cast when damage taken setup. I run a level 1 cast when damage taken so that Molten Shell will have a higher uptime. But keep in mind, this means we need to keep Molten Shell at level 10 in order for it to be supported. Next we have our totems. These are absolutely vital to our damage. The Protector increases your attack speed, and the War Chief increases your melee damage. You'll need multiple totems set up to be able to cast both, and Culling Strike is very, very nice for bosses. I wouldn't worry about keeping these down while mapping, as we only use them to boost single target damage. Moving on, we're running an Assassin's Mark on hit setup. Eventually the goal would be to get enough mana reservation efficiency that we can sustain the full mana cost without life tap. However, that requires something like 60 unreserved mana, and I can't do that at this stage of the build. Our precision needs to be a high enough level that we have 100% hit chance. I've got it at level 17 right now, so I can keep a little more unreserved mana for the Molten Shell trigger cost. But ideally, you could take it to 21. Finally, we have our main auras: Wrath, Defiance Banner, Determination, and Purity of Lightning. These are all socketed into our boots, so they go from level 21 to 23 with our Corruption. If you aren't running Melding of the Flesh, I'd recommend dropping Purity of Lightning and picking up Herald of Ice instead. In a perfect world, I would probably grab Enlighten support and move Defiance Banner out of these boots, hopefully giving us enough mana to tie a second Enlighten support with Precision, Defiance Banner, and picking up Herald of Ice for utility, clear, and damage. And there you have it, my Lightning Strike Raider, one of the fastest and tankiest characters I've ever played. The build is about 80% min-max at the moment, but as I mentioned throughout the video, there are still a lot of realistic and obtainable upgrades available. Please do let me know in the comments below if there's anything you think I've missed, as I am always welcome to ideas for improvement. Just the other day, I read a comment about inspiration support, and the changes I made from that boosted my damage by 25%. Anyway, thank you for watching, good luck with your league, and I'll see you in the next one.